Document 512 is kept here in the National Library. It was written by the leader of an expedition in 1753 and describes a fantastic town of ancient times, which is supposed to be somewhere in the interior of Brazil. A town with wide streets lined by palaces and temples with frescoes and paintings. Perhaps the evidence of a long-lost culture. But there seems to be something else connected with this document. All who have searched for the city have met their doom. But this does not stop further expeditions. Brazil is too untouched and unexplored. It is too wild and exotic, and has plenty of room for such fantasies. Heinz Budwig is a German-Brazilian artist and explorer. He too is searching for the mysterious town from the document. He believes he's discovered important archaeological evidence. The first area he searches is the Amazon district, the land of the Kalapalos, whose ancestors would have ended many other expeditions. However, Budwig is received quite differently. This is not the first time he's come here, and the Kalapalos prepare a welcoming feast for him. And as part of the traditional feast, the ayote fruit is prepared. Budwig then begins his journey, and for 3 days they steer through labyrinths of rivers and tributaries. Few words are spoken. The jungle demands quiet. The last section is taken on foot, a short ascent, and suddenly there is hard ground, steps of stone. It is the start of a stone staircase, in the midst of a jungle of trees and vines. The cleanly cut stone blocks are one placed upon the other. There are more than 30 of them climbing upwards. Budwig is fascinated.
Agora, se eu apertar aqui, ele calcula e dá a nova posição. Isso, por exemplo, quando você...
He then determines their exact location.
Na verdade, aqui vai demorar, que as folhas atrapalham muito.
No one knows how old this flight of stairs is, who has built it, or for what purpose. But Budwig has a theory. He adds this discovery onto his own map, another red dot with the many he's already made. He is convinced the steps belong to a huge road system, which once crossed all of Brazil. The roads began at the time of the Incas. Their realm is marked red on the map. The red roads start here, high in the Peruvian Andes. The Inca fortress of Machu Picchu is testimony to the might and self-assurance of its builders. The backbone of the Inca kingdom was a road network, more than 30,000 kilometers in length. They created boldly designed and secure trails for couriers carrying news. And for the transport of goods. The Incas were some of the most ingenious road builders in history, ensuring there were resting places at regular intervals. No pass was too high, no ravine too deep, and when confronted with massive rock formations, they just tunneled through it. The principal users of the roads were the military, fast-moving troops keeping potential rebellions in check. At least 4 of the major roads led east, down into the humid Brazilian lowlands. But how far? And most of all, to where? Years after Spanish expeditions, Heinz Budwig is on his way to uncover the secret of the roads and towns beyond Machu Picchu. He's been joined by Dr. Klaus Hilbert, a scientist from Porto Alegre. In the foothills of the Diamond Mountains, they find a small path climbing upwards. After a bend, suddenly there are paving stones, stairs, and retaining walls at the curves. The similarity with an Inca road cannot be denied. Was this once part of the network? Hilbert's first impression, though, is that of a shock. He sees a hole in the rock, but it is a drilled borehole for explosives, which has split the stone block. It cannot be very old. This may cast doubt on Budwig's theory of the Inca road in Brazil. But they move on to the small town of Monte Alto, to the south of the Diamond Mountains. Here, Budwig meets Tibirica, a scholar from Sao Paulo, who takes him to see what are described as just stones. Suddenly, a straight line of menhirs, vertical stones like those found in Brittany. What do they hide? Who put these stones up, and why?
Seu Chico, dá tempo aí.
Budwig and Tibirica suggest an astronomical installation, directed to the east. But it is not that precise. it is a good 10 degrees out of line. But the archaeologist Hilbert thinks they are the simple field markings of earlier farmers.
West.
Nearby, they find walls surrounding a square area made of irregular boulders. Tibirica argues that this is a megalithic Celtic site. Then they spot more ruins amongst the wilderness. The unusual architecture includes a gabled front, an entrance but no windows, and all of it divided into two large rooms. Hilbert thinks that somehow it looks like a warehouse, but what would be stored out here? There is no indication of the building's date. The stones themselves do not tell anything, but between the stones are traces of the original builders, a kind of mortar which can be dated.
Wer immer das gebaut hat, die Steine sind wahrscheinlich aus der Umgebung, aus dem Fluss. Und dann haben sie auseinandergesetzt und irgendwie verfugt mit Mörtel oder was.
But hope literally crumbles between the fingers.
Ganz weich und bröselig, das sieht aus wie Lehm. Lehm, den sie aus dem Bach genommen haben, angerührt haben.
It looks like clay, which is a pity, as everybody here uses clay mixed with earth. It is nothing unusual. In the next room, though, there is a different opinion. Tibirica thinks he can trace the origins.
Muito menos de índio. Não, índio não há dúvida que não foi. Seria pré-colombiano? Pré-colombiano, sim senhor. Não tem dúvida. Isto só acredita.
Local people would not have been able to build such a house. The influences here are European, possibly Celtic, Bronze Age. In comparison, Hilbert's idea seems pretty mundane. So, to try to find out more, Budwig decides to detour to the capital, Salvador. And Europe. At the Portuguese archives, Budwig and Hilbert have a meeting with Professor Arivaldo, a historian and expert of Bahian history.
Professor Arivaldo, qual a importância dessa região para a nossa pesquisa?
A respeito dessa região, do povoamento do Brasil. Obrigado. Essa região povoou-se a partir da
Monte Alto used to be an important trading center. In the 18th century, a well-built road led all the way from Monte Alto to the coast at Salvador. Arivaldo believes that Budwig's ruin would have been a warehouse for saltpeter and other goods. The two large windowless rooms would have formed a kind of inn where the travelers slept, and they're typical of the time.
Mais provavelmente, alojamento de viajantes e tropeiros nas estradas que ali cruzavam.
These are the Chapada Diamantina, the Diamond Mountains. According to legend, somewhere here is the town mentioned in document 512, and Budwig believes he knows where. The village of Igatu, which means fine or good water, is on the eastern rim of the mountains and is a complete ruin. Even though the rubble doesn't look very old at first glance, it has to be inspected carefully. Budwig believes this is the goal. Certainly there are more recent ruins, but this place is old, which can be seen by the donkey path, deeply trodden into the rock.
Ja, gut, ich meine, das kann ja alles so sein, aber ich glaube, wenn man dann irgendwie dann auch ein bisschen besser auskennt.
The site of the town fits the description in document 512. It is near a big river, the Paraguaçu, and the gabled houses are specifically described.
Herr Klaus, ja, was doch.
There was even a sewer system, like in ancient Rome, beneath these heavy rock slabs. Clearly, this is an old water canal. Budwig's idea gains ground. And he has additional proof when he finds the remains of an aqueduct. The drinking water was carried over this bridge into the town. But aqueducts are not only for drinking water. Least of all in the Diamond Mountains, as the water is used to wash out diamonds. This still happens today, though the diamond boom is long gone. The sediment is sifted through ever finer holes. Few diamonds now sparkle in this mud. Mostly, it remains a dream. 100 years ago, Egatu was a booming diamond town. Today, it is a ghost town. It is a landscape of three-dimensional sculptures, populated by hyacinth-colored parrots. It's almost as if it were man-made. Could these be the remains of antique columns? Arches designed by an architect? Dome-shaped vaults of geometric rock slabs? In the middle of the bush, far from any settlement, stands a wall. It is hundreds of meters long, made of square stone blocks of basalt. It is incredibly high. The building material is hard basalt, while the subsoil all around is sandstone, a brilliant technical achievement. Each block is placed almost seamlessly onto the other.
Ja, das dann Ritzen dann erodiert. Was dahinter kommt, dass du alles
danach kommt, also das ist so geologisch für mich.
verdammt Alter.
But once again, Klaus Hilbert disappoints Budwig. He says nothing here is man-made. It is all natural, a geological formation. It doesn't make sense to Budwig that this structure might date back millions of years. Over time, the sandstone to the left and right has weathered away, leaving this dam of basalt rocks, which often splits into regular-sized boulders. It is geological wall building. Budwig continues on, searching for the lost town. Budwick is heading for some Stone Age cave paintings set in fantastic surroundings. There is a rock door as an opening, as if it were the entrance to a cathedral. It is a mighty sandstone vault, and all over the ceiling and walls are small paintings, sketches and symbols. The bars depict a cage, and next to it the animal that is supposed to be caught. These walls would have been painted about 10,000 years ago. Budwick has noticed an opening in the rock and enters a dusty room. The walls are covered with unusual engravings and scratch patterns. What was here cannot be determined, but the search for the legendary city and culture of Brazil will continue. Heinz Budwick is inspired to find his Brazilian Machu Picchu.
Imagine it is 100,000 years ago. An ice sheet 1 mile thick grinds over Scandinavia and Siberia. Most of Europe is an endless expanse of prairie with howling winds and stunted vegetation. In the sheltered valleys, the Neanderthals huddle under cliffs and in cave mouths, hunting some animals familiar today, while facing others now extinct. The fearsome cave bear, cave lion, giant bison, and woolly mammoth. For untold generations, the Neanderthals had Europe to themselves. Then a new, modern type of human began developing and spreading slowly from Africa. For centuries, Neanderthals and moderns coexisted, apparently in peace. Then, the Neanderthals vanished.
Why did Neanderthals as a group die out, and why did modern humans become the only form of humans that are around? We don't have all the answers to that question. It's a very difficult question to answer, but it's one where we're starting to get a series of leads from research into the fossils and research into the archaeology, the debris that they left behind.
Our fascination with this beetle-browed fellow has not dimmed in the 150 years since we first made his acquaintance. Artists have given him his human face. Physical anthropologists are trying to make him walk and talk again. And the enduring question of his relationship to us remains. Did Neanderthal and modern man coexist in peace or conflict? Did they go their separate ways? Could they have interbred? Only one thing seems clear from the archaeological record. The life of a Neanderthal was not an easy one. In 1856, a human skeleton was found in a cave in the Neander Valley in Germany. Its discovery began a century-and-a-half argument over the Neanderthals. At the turn of the century, archaeologists and collectors ransacked the cliff sites of southwest France, hunting for Neanderthal bones. The first attempt at a scientific study of this find from La Chapelle was a disaster and misled a whole generation. This 50-year-old Neanderthal's bones were deformed by arthritis, but they led a French scientist to declare that all Neanderthals were stooping hunchbacks with bow legs who couldn't walk straight. The image of the brutish caveman was born. How could such a pathetic creature have possibly survived the rigors of the Ice Age? In reality, scientists have begun a more realistic effort to flesh out the fossil bones. They're using the latest forensic techniques to bring us a true portrait of the Neanderthals, the same techniques police use to identify missing people. Medical artist Michael Anderson first needs his own copy of the La Chapelle skull. To do that, he's made a mold of the skull.
This is a 3-piece mold. The eye sockets out. And there's the cast. It's an exact copy of the original. And that's our final cast. The Neanderthal skull is similar to modern human skulls, and the measurements of the Neanderthal skull fit within the range of modern human populations. But there are some unique qualities to Neanderthal skulls, some of which are, it has a low forehead and high brow ridges here. It also has a large nasal opening. This is characteristic of Neanderthals, and this recessed chin. They don't have a pointed chin like a lot of skulls do in modern human populations.
With the aid of a modern anatomy text, Anderson carefully applies clay to reproduce the exact shape of the muscles that were once attached to the Neanderthal skull.
The muscles on a Neanderthal skull are exactly the same as what you find in a modern human skull. Pathologists have determined that this individual was about in his 40s, which is quite old for a Neanderthal, and he had 2 teeth left in the skull. And this led researchers to believe that he couldn't take care of himself anymore, and it just also points out that life was quite hard for the Neanderthals, and hence I tried to put in some of the gray in the beard, the salt and pepper look, but most likely this person would have had scars on his face and would have been beat up quite a bit, and this is a fairly pristine view of it, but I think that this portrait would have been recognized by members of the tribe, though, in the Neanderthal tribe.
And here is the entire Neanderthal, reconstructed by Anderson with the same meticulous forensic techniques. The ancient bones no longer give us an image of depravity and brutishness, but a startlingly familiar one of vigor and muscularity.
First of all, one of the first things that you notice when you look at a Neanderthal, whether a reconstruction of a Neanderthal or just look at their bones, is they were extremely massively built. For example, the attachments for their pectoral muscles, what bodybuilders call pecs, were about twice the size of those of modern humans. They had the physique of a Mr. Universe without having to work at it. They all had it. It was part of their everyday existence. They did it for survival, not to win world contests. One of the problems with being so strongly built is, again, it's energetically very costly. It's like an athlete in training. You have to take in a lot of calories, and which puts the Neanderthals in a vicious circle. They have to take in a lot of calories to maintain these powerful bodies. in order to take in those calories, they have to be very active and go out and get lots of food, and it's a cycle, the vicious cycle that builds on itself.
Why were the Neanderthals built like Mr. Universe? There's a clue in the stone tools they made.
These are complex tools that require a lot of dexterity to make. Neanderthals made these, but what they resulted in were either handheld tools, like holding a knife by the blade rather than with an effective handle, or spears that were thrusting spears that were not very effective at throwing. They didn't have anything like a bow and arrow, so they would have had to get into close quarters, probably through an ambush, to bring down prey the size of a deer, which they did do.
So their limited tools put a premium on strength and fitness, sculpting the mighty muscles which left their marks on the bones. But these same bones also tell a grimmer story of constant threats to the Neanderthals as they struggled for existence. The bones of the Neanderthals tell a harrowing tale of the risks they faced in the perilous prehistoric world of the Ice Age.
They have broken bones on their faces. They have broken arm bones, foot bones, hand bones. They have breaks, bruises, bad sprains, pretty much everywhere, as long as they were able to keep moving. And what is very interesting is that the distribution of breaks in their bodies is very similar to the distribution of fractures that you find in rodeo riders, especially bull riders and the like. And what this suggests is a lot of close encounters of a nasty animal kind. The trauma, the growth defects, the low life expectancy, all of it suggests to us that Neanderthals were having a tough time, and that any modern human population that moved into the area, that for whatever reason, whatever organizational or technological reason, was able to increase their life expectancy, to increase their survivalship of infants, of children, of adolescents. Any even very subtle increase in that, in those demographic aspects of their populations would lead over a few thousand years to a complete replacement of Neanderthal populations.
But it wasn't just physical risks that put Neanderthals at a disadvantage. Lewis Binford, who's studied Neanderthals for nearly 30 years, thinks more subtle aspects of behavior made them less able to cope with change than modern humans. One difference seems to have been their inefficient use of fire.
Modern man has, we'll say, relatively poor fuels in a fuel-scarce environment. He'll bring in stones, he'll start a fire. As combustion goes on, the stones heat up that he puts in the fire. Then after the fuel is burned down, he's still got radiant heat. He can move those warm stones into a sleeping area or whatever, and they appear in the archaeological site as fire-cracked rock. There isn't any such material in Neanderthal sites, yet they were living in severe environments in which this would have been a very useful tactic to have had. They didn't do it.
But if Binford is right, there was a more fundamental problem, a failure to plan ahead, to take advantage of predictable seasonal events, like an annual salmon run.
It's very hard in Neanderthal sites to find many salmon bones in environments where you pretty well know there were salmon, because the salmon bones are in the feces of bears that were contemporary. So they basically seem to be exploiting the environment on an encounter basis rather than on a planned schedule or a tactical basis, which is really what we do quite well.
So did Neanderthals die out because they were unintelligent?
I think Neanderthals were smart, just that the way in which their intelligence was organized and in terms of what it made possible was perhaps a bit different. That their behavior was exactly like us, or just sort of a watered-down version, a kind of group of people who needed a Head Start program to make them like us. I think that's perhaps romance, because it doesn't address the issue, what were they really like? And that's what we'd like to know, and a lot of people are trying to find out.
What were the Neanderthals really like? In the continuing quest for their identity, new clues have surfaced about the unusual relationships between Neanderthal men and women. For 100,000 years, Neanderthals endured their brief, hard lives. Then modern man emerged, first in Africa and gradually spread throughout the Near East and Europe until about 35,000 years ago, there were no more Neanderthals left.
There seems to have been a lot of intermixing in areas like Central Europe, probably less in Western Europe, but the whole thing seems to have been peaceful. And even in Western Europe, where the Neanderthals seem to have died out largely without issue, they probably were simply outcompeted for resources.
The question is, were they just a side branch, a dead end with no relation to us? Or does every one of us walk around with traces of this strange type of human in our genes?
Well, the issue of how much genetic material we may have shared with the Neanderthals is perhaps put in perspective better by some of the biological chemists who point out that we share about 95% of the genetic material with chimpanzees. So we certainly share an awful lot, even if there was no crossbreeding with the Neanderthals.
If we shared so much, why did the Neanderthals and their way of life die out? Louis Binford thinks peculiarities of Neanderthal behavior doomed them to die out. And nothing was more peculiar than the relationship between Neanderthal men and women.
Were they organized like us into basic families in which males and females cooperate in support of the young and help feed one another and stuff? Of course, this is something we'd like very much to know.
From the Neanderthal site of Coombe-Grenal in southwest France, Binford draws an extraordinary conclusion. Men and women, he thinks, led largely separate lives, foraging outside the cave and eating most of what they encountered on the spot. There was little bringing back of food to share. That vital human institution, the family, seems to be missing.
I think we have to imagine that much consumption is done individualistically and where it's encountered. And those things that are brought back to the cave are primarily things that require processing, breaking open, heating, or something like that. So that we're not seeing a normal picture of a family coming home for supper. This is also borne out by the kinds of species that we find in different places in the cave. And the frequency with which we think we have some ability to recognize what is male and female, which is arguable, but there's certainly kind of dichotomy in the site, suggesting that females may well be on their own much of the time, and males come in periodically, but they're not permanently associated as a mixed-sex group.
Was cooperation between men and women a key advantage that modern humans had over the Neanderthals? An advantage that pushed inefficient Neanderthals into oblivion? Many disagree with Binford and point to evidence suggesting a concern for family. In fact, a Neanderthal mind hauntingly like our own.
The Neanderthals were the first humans to intentionally bury their dead. We have about 24 burials of Neanderthals, from little children to old adults, men, women, boys, girls. Burying a family member who dies, whether it's a child or an adult, says that you care about that person, that that person has a specific social role in the group, that that person is important, and for the memory of that person, and to, in a sense, readjust the roles, the social roles of the people within that group, you go through some kind of a ritual, what we call a funeral.
The argument that they cared for wounded persons or aged individuals, and that proves that they had a kind of emotional or more spiritual orientation to the world. I'm not so sure that that's totally convincing. Many other animals tolerate or even care for or help support disadvantaged animals on occasion. Other primates do this. There's a beautiful example from the macaques in Japan of a congenitally disadvantaged individual that made it and reproduced children and so forth. So that kind of evidence is not that convincing.
They moved, they walked, they handled objects, they spoke language just as capably as any of us do. They may have had a slightly different accent than we do because they had larger mouths with larger faces, but basically if you tried to teach them Chinese or English or French or Swahili or whatever, you wouldn't have any trouble doing it. They were perfectly capable of speaking modern human languages.
But Lewis Binford thinks that it was modern humans who had the first effective language.
This is not to be confused with communication. I'm sure the early guys had good communication systems, nor necessarily speech or the ability to articulate sound. That could be a communication system. The issue is how it's organized.
So what really happened when Neanderthals, perhaps disadvantaged in speech, technology, and food gathering, encountered fully modern humans?
Of course, it's interesting to speculate, particularly based on the Western European data, where we have some suggestion that Neanderthals were probably around at the time that also fully modern man was around.
They gradually spread, they intermixed with the Neanderthals, they produced offspring with them who would have ancestors both of Neanderthal and modern human biology or anatomy, and that the resultant populations would then spread further west and further north, eventually establishing what we call early modern humans and leading to the eventual disappearance by 35,000 years ago of what we call Neanderthals.
How ironic that the ancient people once depicted as subhuman brutes must have made a contribution to the genes of all of us living today.
There are no Neanderthals alive today, but the Neanderthals did not die out without issue. They passed on their genes, they passed on offspring that themselves became the ancestors of modern Europeans.
So we have given Neanderthal a human face, and in many ways it looks startlingly like our own. They cared for their sick and their injured in a world fraught with disease and danger. They gently buried and mourned their dead, and they probably looked forward to a better life in the next world. But they could not see beyond their day-to-day, hand-to-mouth existence. In the end, this lack of foresight may have killed them all. Perhaps we, their successors, would do well to remember that.
Brazil is too untouched and unexplored. It is too wild and exotic, and has plenty of room for such fantasies. Heinz Budwig is a German-Brazilian artist and explorer. He too is searching for the mysterious town from the document. He believes he's discovered important archaeological evidence. The first area he searches is the Amazon district, the land of the Kalapalos, whose ancestors would have ended many other expeditions. However, Budwig is received quite differently. This is not the first time he's come here. Document 512 is kept here in the National Library. It was written by the leader of an expedition in 1753 and describes a fantastic town of ancient times, which is supposed to be somewhere in the interior of Brazil. A town with wide streets lined by palaces and temples with frescoes and paintings. Perhaps the evidence of a long-lost culture. But there seems to be something else connected with this document.
In diesem Dokument eine Art Fluch zu ruhen scheint, denn alle, die bislang nach der Stadt suchten, ins Buch stehen.
All who have searched for the city have met their doom. But this does not stop further expeditions, and the Kalapalos prepare a welcoming feast for him. And as part of the traditional feast, the ayote fruit is prepared. Budwig then begins his journey, and for 3 days they steer through labyrinths of rivers and tributaries. Few words are spoken. The jungle demands quiet. The last section is taken on foot, a short ascent, and suddenly there is hard ground, steps of stone. It is the start of a stone staircase, in the midst of a jungle of trees and vines. The cleanly cut stone blocks are one placed upon the other. There are more than 30 of them climbing upwards. Budwig is fascinated.
Agora, se eu apertar aqui, ele calcula e dá a nova posição. Isso, por exemplo, quando
He then determines their exact location.
Na verdade, aqui vai demorar, que as folhas atrapalham muito.
No one knows how old this flight of stairs is, who has built it, or for what purpose. But Budwig has a theory. He adds this discovery onto his own map, another red dot with the many he's already made. He is convinced the steps belong to a huge road system, which once crossed all of Brazil. The roads began at the time of the Incas. Their realm is marked red on the map. The red roads start here, high in the Peruvian Andes.